When people reject God's word, he will allow them to experience the consequence of their choosing. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he got all his things together and set off to a distant country. After he had spent everything, he began to be in need. There's 2 people that you could be at any time in your life. What son are you right now in this life? Are you the son that's been rebellious that needs to come back to God? Or are you the son that... Yo, what's going on? Before we get into the episode, go ahead and subscribe. I see that a bunch of you guys are watching, but not a lot of you guys are hitting the subscribe button. And I want to make sure that you are getting all the information when you need it. And I want you to join the community. You know, we have an awesome community. We chop it up about God. We keep it real. We stay fly. Like, that's what it's all about. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. So I'm actually really, really excited to do this episode today. Before we get into it, do not forget to sign up to the newsletter. The newsletter is really a place where I feel like I take the whole episode so that you can kind of, tap into it even further and use it almost as a study guide for your own time. And you can really lock into what's being said in this episode. And specifically for this episode, what we're going to talk about is essentially the idea of the prodigal son and what it looks like to be rebellious and to come back to God. And what does that actually look like? What do you do when you want to come back to God? How do we come back to God after we feel like we've been in rebellion against him? Questions that I have for myself in times that I've been rebellious against God. And not only that, the dynamic of the people who haven't been rebellious, but like what happens when you feel as though you've been doing all the right things, but God still feels far from you. So look, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. So we're actually in Luke 7:15-11. And so I'm going to read some of this so we can kind of start getting into it and lay the foundation of the episode. Luke 15:11. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, "Give me my share of the estate." Of course, something the youngest one would say. So he divided the property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got all his things together and set off to a distant country. So he took all his wealth, went to a different distant country to live in the wild by himself with the wealth that he just asked his father for. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So, this is verse 15. He went to see if he can get hired out of the country in the fields, and he went with the pigs. He went to go sleep essentially with the pigs. So there's this very specific law here that's going on. And I find it super interesting that the younger son went to the father and was like, you know what? Before it's even my time, let me go ahead and get my inheritance now. Because for those of you who don't know, and that kind of setup, you don't get your inheritance until you reach a certain age and or the dad passed away. And in this verse specifically, the dad was a king. And so specifically, you have access to, and this is just alluding to what I'm going to talk about later, he had access to all of the wealth. He had access to everything he can possibly want, but he wanted his share now. And that kind of brings me kind of to my first point that often we want things from God that we are not even ready to handle or to steward. And oftentimes God will give us those things as a way to show us like, okay, if you want that right now and you're really forcing and you're really praying for that, I'm going to give it to you to show you what it would look like without my covering over it if you want it now because you feel as though it's quote unquote owed to you right in this moment. And so as I was reading this and I was studying, I was like, that's super interesting because now that kind of brings us to the idea of free will. Like God gives us free will to choose things and to not to choose different things. And so the first verse that was like popping in my mind is the idea of sowing and reaping. That's Galatians 6:7. Whatever a man sows, he will reap. And so the sowing and reaping aspect of the son is this. I want this, right? That's me asking, and I'm going to reap pretty much famine because I don't know how to steward what I'm asking for. And that's always the important thing before we go to ask for God of something. We should be asking for the integrity to steward the thing that we're asking for. not just the thing itself. It has to be a twofold prayer. God, yes, I want that. I feel as though you're calling me to this, but can I also show me how to gain the integrity to steward this? Because if not, then I won't be able to do the things that you want me to do with the gift that you've given me. And that's something that I've always prayed for, to always make sure that God, before you give me any kind of platform, before anything, like I don't even want any of that first. I want the integrity to be the type of person who can steward it well so I can end this thing called life good. Like, I don't want to just be another person who just starts, a podcast or starts posting on social media, but then gone the next day because of some kind of scandal or something like that. It's like you have to want the integrity more than you want the thing that God is trying to give to you. You have to want God more than the gift itself, because if not, you'll end up in ruin, similar to what just happened. And the interesting part about this is God allowed consequences to come to him. And the pain in there is a teacher. Like the pain that he's going through of, okay, I got all the wealth, I got what I wanted, I went to a foreign land, I'm spending my money. I'm pretty sure he had friends with him, spending his money, doing all this stuff, getting bad counsel in his ear. And now it's like, oh crap, like I have to work, which is interesting because he was going to look for work, but he is royalty. He never had to work because he would have stayed in his father's house if he would have stayed in order with the father. You see how crazy that is? How your personal free will can completely divert your entire life because of something that you want that you aren't ready for. So I thought that was super strange to me that like he would do that and then now go look for work after he, spent all his wealth. And in Psalms 81:12, it says, and this is the Lord talking, so I gave them over to their stubborn hearts. When people continuously reject God, when they continuously reject God's word, he will allow them to experience as the consequence of their choosing. That's crazy. When you continuously reject God, you will experience the consequences of what you chose. And he will withdraw, and then now you'll feel unprotected because you decided to go for the thing that actually wasn't good for your soul, that wasn't good for your heart. And so now we can go to the section 2 of Luke 15:17-19. So when he came to his senses, I love that part, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against you. Heaven, I have sinned against you and heaven. I am no longer worthy. That's crazy. I'm no longer worthy to be called son. Make me like one of your hired servants. This is crazy. So what we see there is that self-realization and coming to yourself through the suffering that he had. There is not always about some kind of crazy spiritual experience. Sometimes it is, and I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but it's not about some type of crazy spiritual experience. Sometimes there takes a level of self-awareness while you're in your suffering and while you're in your mess to say, you know what? I think I've suffered enough. I think I've done the things to put myself in this position because, again, God didn't put him in this position. This is something he chose to do. And so we see him saying, like, you know what? Like, I have to come to my senses and say, wow, no, I actually need to get connected back to God. I actually need to go back to my father. And the realization of, wow, I'm struggling to eat and to get food, but the servants of my father, they eat and they have more than enough. And so him as the son now, because of his choices, is left in a place to where he is uncovered, doesn't have any food, and is in a pigsty, somewhere that he shouldn't even be because of what he chose to do with something that he wasn't ready to steward. And so as he's coming to himself, he's getting that awareness, and then he plans to confess. And I thought this was interesting, though, because his confession was rooted in shame and unworthiness. Because as it says in 19, I am no longer worthy to be called your son, and make me like one of your servants. So he was plotting after him coming to awareness that he messed up and did something wrong. His instant thing was to choose shame and become unworthy, saying, I'm not even worthy of whatever my father could give me. I'm not worthy of anything from my father. And so then that ends up leading him to like that pain kind of leads to that level of clarity to say, you know what, I messed up. But he went even further to change his identity to a servant when he was first he was an heir of the father. And so bad choice led to consequence, led to him shifting him. And not again, God didn't shift, or the father didn't say, oh, now you're not my son. He decided to shift his title and his identity from son to servant because of something that he did. So you see how you see how that following along, how that happens, of like you choose something bad, then you are now down on yourself. Then you say you're not worthy of something that the father freely gave you. He didn't have to even work for the thing, the wealth, the covering that his father gave him, because that was his father. He was a son. And so suffering can sometimes awake you, but it also tempts you to settle for less than sonship, being under Christ. And you see this parallel with the story as Jesus is talking through this. The parallel and the big key moment of this is your identity is son, daughter of the king, but your choices flip that and make you look at it as you're not worthy of what he's giving you. And so now in Luke 15:20-24, so he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Verse 21. The son said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to the servant, didn't even acknowledge what he said. The father went to the servant and said, quickly, bring him the best robe and put it on him. Put the ring on his finger and the sandals on his feet. Bring a fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this is my son who was dead and is now alive again. He was lost, but now he's found. So we can begin to celebrate. Beautiful picture. Beautiful picture there that Jesus is painting. Because one, it breaks down the idea of the kind of God that we really serve. And especially to give context in that idea of the father, the idea of the father running. I mean, you have to think about this. The father was a king and he is running now to the son. That is breaking cultural norms to almost, that could have publicly shamed the father. I'm a king and I'm running to my son. That doesn't happen like that. And so we even see the kind of God that we serve, that I love where it says like, the Lord stands at the door and knocks. This is in Revelation, that the Lord is there. He is willing to look quote unquote shameful in order to come back to be back in communion with us once we take that first step and once we draw near to him. As it says in James 4:8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinner, and purify your heart, you double-minded. For you're double-minded. And so there is a principle there that when we come to ourselves and we run back to the Father will run back to us. He was a far away. So in my mind, I'm like, wow, if he was far off and the Father didn't even necessarily know he was coming back, and this is just Amir, I could be 100% wrong saying this, but it almost makes me think that the Father was waiting for him. He's like, you know what? Like he was probably every day, went to the gates of the palace and was like, you know what? I'm just going to keep looking out for my son every day because I know he's going to come back. I know he just had that knowing, and seeing him from afar off, ran to him and kissed him and loved him because he knew who his identity was. He didn't even acknowledge what the son said. I am not worthy to be your son. He was like, man, whatever. Here, servants, get him right. Get him his robe, do all that stuff. Because he's like, I'm not acknowledging what you're saying. The fact that you came back to me is the important part. And so now I want to celebrate you. And I want to break down this very interesting, the symbolic nature of what happened, the father giving him certain things. And so we see that the father asked the servant to bring him a robe. And the symbolic nature of the robe was to restore honor and righteousness. And we know that because of what it says in Isaiah 61:10. He clothed me with garments of salvation, and he has wrapped me in a robe of righteousness. So right there, it was a depiction of that robe was very significant because of it restored dignity and righteousness. And not only that, it kind of reversal of the shame and condemnation that he was feeling. Interesting here too, in the ancient cultures, a robe, especially the best robe, because the father said, bring me the best robe, represented honor, position, and acceptance. So follow this. Spiritually, it it puts it points to imputed righteousness of Christ upon repentance and the return to the Father. Because the Son was repentant coming back. And so now he has his identity is shifting by the garments that he's wearing. So then we can talk about the ring, where it says put a ring on his finger. The ring now is a symbol of authority and inheritance. And we know this because of Genesis 41:42, when Pharaoh gives Joseph a signet ring, and that symbolized his authority. I think that's just so beautiful. This like the symbolic nature of not just the spiritual aspect of it, but literal God can give you new clothes to change your identity and show you completely different, scrape away your shame, scrape away what you think you are, and put you in that identity and to restore that sonship. So, and in Jewish cultures too, a signet ring specifically meant the right to conduct business on behalf of the family. That's crazy. So there is even a deeper level of symbolism there, that now that you are back, you repented, you're running to the Father, you're getting that signet ring to show of you now have the authority to operate in this business, in this kingdom business, to come back to the Father in that way, to have authority over what you've just gone through. And that's the beautiful thing about spiritual authority. Once you gain a spiritual authority over something that you're struggling with, you now have the authority to talk and to fight against that thing, and to be able to help pull other people out, because you've gone through that process of pruning, of making the bad decision, coming back to the Father, getting that, symbolically signet ring on you to now have authority over what you've just been through. Beautiful. Then the sandals, put sandals on his feet. Symbolically, in Exodus 12:11, the Israelites were wearing sandals ready for freedom, ready for freedom from the Egyptians. And so that's another way of freedom, how it's shown there. So the son returns barefoot, a symbol of shame and slavery. The father gives him sandals to signify freedom, to restore and have a new purpose, right? So spiritually, it points to being set free from slavery and restored to walk in the newness of his life. Romans 6:4. And we see this restoration language go even further, essentially to follow that the clothes that he was wearing when he came back to the Father, torn up, naked, dirty, all this stuff, the Father puts the new stuff off him, gives him authority, changes his name, changes his identity back to son when the son didn't even know, that didn't even want to take on the identity that was already his. Crazy. So here's the flow of what's happening. It went from sin to confession to grace to restoration to joy, celebration, because the Father wanted to celebrate him coming back to life. It said, my son went from death to life. And so throughout Scripture, there are many different stories of a garment representing someone's identity, and the garment there changes the status and the destiny of the person through a divine restoration. Is almost like a mark on them, which I thought was so beautiful. There's many stories I can we're going to list a few so you guys can kind of like look this up and do a deeper study. Jacob and Esau, Joseph, his coat of many colors, Tamar. We have Zechariah 3:4, and then Revelations 19:8. That there's always a symbolic nature of your clothes being able to change your identity and your status and your destiny, which I thought was so crazy, just based on what the father put on the son changed his identity back and restored it back to son. I thought that was beautiful. Slavery to sonship, shame to honor, from rebellion to righteousness. Essentially what happened there. The prodigal son's new garment is a mirror ultimately to spiritual truth, that God doesn't merely cover our past, he clothes us with righteousness to restore our identity. That's so beautiful. We're almost done, but listen to this. Now, this is section 4, and this is from verse 25 to 35. And this is talking about the other son. So we started with the one son, and now we're going to the second son. Like, what was he doing in all this? Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and saw dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, like, what's going on? Like, and they're like, your brother has come back. And so then the older brother became angry after seeing what the father had did for the younger son. Follow me here. But when then he goes to the dad and is like, yo, when this son of yours was out there doing all this foolishness, like, I felt as though you have never done something like this for me. And then the father, my son, this is the father saying this now to the older son, you are always with me, and everything that I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad because your brother is back and is not lost anymore. So what happened with this older brother? He wasn't home when the younger brother came back. He saw celebration. He saw the father killing the goat or killing the calf and doing all this stuff and giving him a ring and all that stuff. So he comes back like, bro, like, what's going on? Like, that's crazy that this is happening right now. But what the father is trying to express to the son is like, you are being self-righteous in a way because you think that, and you don't even have the awareness of everything that I've done for the son who came back. One, that you aren't instantly excited to see your brother be back. That's one. And number two, you don't even have the realization that everything that I did for him was already yours. Because the father says, son, you are with me. You have access to all of this already. You have access to the best robes, the signet ring, the sandals, a party that you can throw at any time. And the realization here, which I thought was super interesting, is the older son is operating under a slavery mindset. Because what I didn't read there was he obeys whatever he needs to do, but he never fully comes into the understanding that that is his father and that he can have any. It's not slave, it's obedience. And then the father kind of like gently like rebukes him and says, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. All of this prosperity that you're seeing me dump onto my son was already in your possession. You had access to that. You just didn't have the awareness of it. But instead of having the awareness of the good side, you looked automatically to the bad side and said, oh, well, he gets all this and I don't get anything. But whole time you had access to it. It's kind of like being locked in a room and you are holding the key and you can unlock it, or being locked out rather. By being locked out of a room, you're holding the key and you're like, you know what, God, that's so unfair that you're letting them party in there. And this father's like, yo, to unlock the door, you have access to it. I think that's so crazy. And so it's this level of jealousy that kind of blinds him, right? And many believers, I feel as though, act like the older brother, right? They're present in the house, but they're living as an orphan. And his problem wasn't lack of blessing, but lack of revelation that he already had it. His bitterness, his comparison blinded him from the truth, blinded him from what he already had, the inheritance that was already his. The older son's orphan spirit caused him to live as though he was powerless and empty-handed, even while he was living and surrounded in blessing. And that level of self-righteousness led him to being lost, just as lost as the brother who wanted his inheritance. And the big key in the idea here is that God doesn't operate in fairness. He operates by grace, and both sons needed that same grace. The first son needed the grace to come back and it needed his identity changed. The second son needed to be rebuked and changed his perspective to have him already know whatever you think you want or what you need is already have access to it. But because of your jealousy and your self-righteousness, it blinded you from the blessing that's already in your hands, that's already surrounded you. And so there's two sides of the story. There's two people that you could be at any time in your life. And I submit that you ask yourself, what son are you right now in this life? Are you the son that's been rebellious that needs to come back to God? Or are you the son that has been in the Father's house, but not realizing what you have access to by way of your sonship, by way of God already caring and looking out for you? But because you are not looking at it from the right perspective, God is not able to bless you in that way. So I really pray that this blessed you. I pray that, if you really want to dive deeper study into it, I'm going to have all of my notes for it inside the newsletter. So go ahead and sign up for that. And something that I never say, please go ahead and subscribe. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We're posting, hopefully moving forward, about a video a week. And I pray that this bless you. With that, go in peace. See y'all in the next one.